Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Budget Magic. So I think we are 2 weeks away, this episode and one more, away from the start of our exploration of Amonkhet. So in the meantime, since Standard is dead, we are heading to Modern for a super sweet beatdown deck. So if you like just playing big creatures, swinging with them as often as possible, and hoping that it gets the job done, you're going to be a fan of Little Kid Green White. So the name Little Kid Green White, I didn't make that up. That's actually what people call these type of decks, the green white or junk decks, that instead of going like Jund and Abzan with a whole bunch of removal and Thought Seizes, are playing just the biggest, most efficient creatures at every point on the curve and hoping to beat down, because little kids love their crawl worms and love just smashing these huge creatures. So it's kind of that style of deck, but it's actually really powerful and can do some really sweet things. So as you can see, $96 in the paper world, 30 ticks on Magic Online, so certainly not bad for a pretty competitive and upgradable modern deck. A quick reminder before we break down Little Kid Green White: if you enjoy Budget Magic and the other series here on the channel, it would be amazing of you if you could take a quick second, click that subscribe button down in the corner of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So Little Kid Green White is basically a curve deck. The whole idea of this deck, the whole plan, is to play the most above the curve powerful creatures at each slot on the curve. And we do this from 1 mana up to 4 mana, so probably the easiest way to really understand the deck is to just go up the curve, starting at 1 up to 4. So first off, in the 1-drop slot, we have Dryad Militant and Experiment 1. So Dryad Militant might not look like much. It's a Savannah Lions, but it's actually surprisingly relevant in Modern at the moment. It hoses on Storm decks, Snapcaster decks. There's a lot of decks that take advantage of spells in their graveyard. So not only is Dryad Militant a 2/1, it's also green and white, which you'll see as we get along the curve a bit is really important. It can make our Dryad Militant into a 4/3 pretty easily. And then Experiment 1, on the other hand, is just a beater. It starts off as a 1/1, but as we play more creatures, we make it into a 3/3, even a 4/4. It just gets really big, can also regenerate in a pinch. So these are the 1-drops. Moving up to 2-drop, we have Old School Watchwolf, the original 2-mana 3/3. So it's just big. It doesn't do anything crazy. It's actually a vanilla creature. It's just really big for its mana cost. And then we also have the upgraded Watchwolf in Fleecebane Lion, which is literally a Watchwolf with the upside of going monstrous potentially. Not all that common that we go monstrous. We're trying to beat down. Hopefully games are going to end quickly. But if the game goes long, the board gets clogged up, it is a nice upside that we can just spend all of our mana on a turn to monstrous our Fleecebane Lion and have this almost impossible to deal with threat. With Hexproof and Indestructible, there's not much that gets rid of it. Wraths don't do it. You can't target it. The only thing that really would hit it would be some sort of sacrifice effect like Liliana, and that's not that likely because we have other creatures. And then Qasali Pridemage is only a 2/2 for 2, so kind of breaks from the being above the curve trend of our deck. However, it has Exalted, so it can attack for 3, so it's a Watchwolf when it's attacking. It's also really nice with our other creatures. Say our opponent gets down a Tasigur, we can attack with a 4/4 if we have a Qasali Pridemage out because of the Exalted trigger. Also just randomly hoses on artifacts and enchantments, so if our opponent has a Leyline, an Ensnaring Bridge, Affinity stuff, random Tron stuff like Oblivion Stone, we have a main deck card that we want to play anyway that can fight against those strategies. The 3-drop slot is where we get some really big stuff and some really interesting stuff. So Dauntless Escort is kind of the original Selfless Spirit. Selfless Spirit, of course, is only 2 mana. I would love to have Selfless Spirit in the deck because it's much more palatable to sacrifice your 2-drop rather than your 3-drop, but it's still a pretty powerful ability. 3/3 for 3 isn't insane, but it's on curve, and being able to sack it to fizzle a Wrath and Anger the Gods is a really nice ability to have. Loxodon Smiter, on the other hand, is just massive. 4/4 for 3, plus it fights against counterspell heavy decks since it can't be countered, so if our opponent's plan is just to remand us into Oblivion and Mana Leak and Cryptic, Loxodon gets around that. And it also hoses on discard, which is nice against Thoughtseize and Inquisition to some extent, but most of the time our opponent will just pick something else. Where it really shines is against specific decks, but the most popular card is Kolaghan's Command. Loxodon Smiter just insane against that because we get to choose what we discard. Our opponent thinks they're going to 2-for-1 us, then all of a sudden we have an Elephant Soldier on the battlefield beating down, so it's pretty sweet. 4-drops is kind of our finishers, and the big thing about Wiltleaf Liege and Knight of the New Alara isn't that they're so great on their own, but they make our other creatures insane. So if you think back about the creatures we've talked about, throw out Experiment 1 is an outlier. That was just the second best 1-drop I could find on a budget. But every single one is green and white. So what that means is when Wiltleaf Liege comes down, all of our other creatures get +2/+2. So all of a sudden, Dryad Militant is a 4/3, Loxodon Smiter is a 6/6, Fleecemane Lion Watchwolves are 5/5s. They're just massive, pretty much bigger than anything on the battlefield. So our curve of going Dryad Militant into Watchwolf, into Loxodon Smiter, into Wiltleaf Liege, that's a really crazy amount of damage. And the nice thing is, by the time we get to turn 4 and we're casting our Wiltleaf Liege, that's when our opponents likely put up some defense, and boosting all of our team by +2/+2 comes at the perfect time for us to keep forcing through damage, forcing our opponent into bad blocks, and hopefully closing out the game. Knight of New Alara, not great, but it's basically the backup Wiltleaf Liege. So it kind of does the same thing in our deck. Each multicolor creature gets +1/+1 for each of their colors. Since all of our non-Experiment 1 creatures are green and white, all of them get +2/+2. So it gives the same bonus. The problem is it's only a 2/2, and it doesn't have the nice discard upside like Loxodon Smiter. So our deck has actually a bunch of cards that hate against discard, which is a pretty nice little bonus when it works out. So that's the creatures. We also have a single spell in the deck, in the main deck, and that is Dromoka's Command. So Dromoka's Command is our removal spell, but it kind of just does it all. We have so many big creatures that fighting is almost always going to kill what we want it to. There's very few creatures in Modern, once the game goes along, that we're not going to be able to fight and kill with the fight mode of Dromoka's Command, especially when you throw a +1/+1 counter on it. The upside of being able to fizzle the damage of an instant or sorcery is insanely important for our deck. It stops an Anger of the Gods, it stops some combo finishes to our face like Conflagrate from Dredge, and you never know, stacking an enchantment doesn't come up very often, but if our opponent randomly plays a Courser of Krufix on turn 3, it's nice to have a way to deal with it. So just all around, super flexible, great removal spell in the deck. Mana base wise, we got 2 special lands that are actually important. Gavany Township is just so good. We curve out, maybe we want our creatures to be even bigger to close out the game. We can start just dumping our mana into the township, and it basically is our source of card advantage. Since we're green-white, we don't really have card draw. We're going to kind of play out our hand, run out of cards, and Township gives us a repeatable way to use our mana every single turn that's really powerful and really beneficial to our game plan. Stirring Wildwood, you might notice, turns into a green and white creature, which means that it gets the benefit from Knight of the New Alara, gets the benefit from Wiltleaf Liege, and again, it's another kind of mana sink when everything goes wrong, and the cost is pretty low. Not only is Stirring Wildwood budget friendly for some reason, but it's also just a tap land, so all we're really giving up to play the Wildwood is lands coming into play tapped. And the rest of our mana base, the main goal is to have lands untapped as much as possible. Stirring Wildwoods, like we said, always going to be tapped, but hopefully Sunpetal Grove, Fortified Village, Forest, and Plains will mostly allow us to curve out with untapped lands. It's not the same as having fetches for shock lands, but that's the main goal of the deck. In some decks, if you're playing slower, controlling decks, you can get away with playing more tap lands. In this deck, since our whole goal is to play 1-drop on turn 1, 2-drop on turn 2, 3-drop, 4-drop, up to 4 mana, we really need our first 4 lands to come into play untapped. If we have to play off curve and play 1-drop on turn 2, 2-drop on turn 3, our deck's really going to struggle. So trying to get the right mix of budget-friendly lands that are still going to come into play untapped as often as possible is really key to the deck's success. In the sideboard, Burn to Force Tender, basically another Pyroclasm, Anger of the Gods, Fizzler effect. Also deals with random Conflagrates, Lightning Storms, things like that. Mana Tithe and Dawn Charm are our plan against combo decks. So we don't don't have Ley Line of Sanctity. We don't have some of the other white cards that really hose on combo-y spell-based decks because they're expensive. So for us, Mana Tithe gives us a gotcha counter. When our opponent goes to cast their Scapeshift or Primeval Titan, we can randomly get it. Dawn Charm can fizzle combat, but it's mostly to counter a spell that targets us, like a Conflagrate, something along those lines. And then we have Condemn. Backup removal spell, also just very good against Death Shadow. Get the 2 or 3 for 1 by forcing the opponent to gain life. Beast Within is our goal against Tron, and Disenchant gets rid of Ensnaring Bridge, those type of non-creature permanents that are going to make it really hard for us to win the game with our beatdown plan. And that is Little Kid Green-White for Modern, and that's our budget Magic deck for this week. So I think this deck's pretty sweet. There's not a whole lot to it. It's pretty straightforward. We try to curve out, we play powerful creatures at every point on the curve. Hopefully our creatures are bigger than our opponent's creatures. We got a little trickery with the Smiters and Wiltleaf Liege's discard effects. Also, Dramoka's command can just do so many things, so there's a little bit of trickery there. But for the most part, we're just curving out, smashing face, trying to get our opponent dead as quickly as possible, and then on turn 4, hopefully dropping either a Wiltleaf Liege or the Knight of New Alara to pump up all of our stuff just so big that hopefully we can close out the game on turn 4. So that's the goal of the deck, just beat down with these huge green-white creatures. So overall, I think the deck's pretty sweet, and I really like how upgradable it is. There are some things you can do with more budget going Abzan, where this has been at various times, or similar decks. Little Kid, Junk, Little Kid, Green-White have been tier-ish decks. So I really like not only the potential of the budget version, which seems fairly competitive, but also the ability to upgrade this into a more tier deck, or tier in the past. It hasn't been played too much lately, but a really powerful deck nonetheless. So it provides a good foundation for upgrading as well. So anyway, that's our budget Magic deck for this week. Little Kid Green-White for Modern. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoy the gameplay videos, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you haven't already, take a minute and click that subscribe button. It's a great way to support the channel for free, and you'll find the next video in the playlist right here.